So the step 5 testing of the medium's accuracy, they participate in, we refer to as quintuple-blind readings, where there's no normal way they could get the information. It can't be hot reading. It can't be cold reading. They can't look anything up. They can't read your cues. The readings take place over the phone. The experimenter, serving as a proxy, doesn't know anything about you or your deceased person.
Welcome to What the Fuck Just Happened. I'm your host, Liz Enton. If you listen to the intro, you know my story. If not, here's a brief summary. I'm a sciencey skeptic, and when my dad died, I took a shot in the dark and decided to investigate if there was any possible evidence of an afterlife. I assumed that was as realistic as Santa Claus, but I was desperate. However, I was so blown away by what I discovered that I wrote a book and launched this podcast. In this podcast, I will be talking to some fairly normal people about some really weird shit. I speak with everyone from psychic mediums and afterlife researchers to ordinary people who've had some inexplicable experiences. So come, listen. There's no need to draw any final conclusions. Keep an open mind and wonder, what the fuck just happened?
Hi, today I'm speaking with Dr. Julie Beischel. She is co-founder and director of research at the Windbridge Institute and Windbridge Research Center. She has a doctorate in pharmacology and many books and peer-reviewed studies on psychic mediums. And these all got me through my darkest and earliest days of my grief, and can't imagine those first few months without all of her research. So welcome, Dr. Beischel, and thanks so much for being on.
Thanks so much for having me. This is going to be really fun. We're going to have a really good time, Liz.
I know, I'm excited. So I want to jump in because I really related to you and your first medium reading and all your skepticism. So how did you even get into this in the first place? I know you have a doctorate in pharmacology and you're a lot more not the typical person who initially would go be open to all of this afterlife science.
Yeah. So like a lot of people, I had a personal experience when I was in graduate school. I lost my mom to suicide. And I was a scientist. I started to look around and wonder, like, well, what does science have to say about this? I was raised Catholic and I had this like very general idea of this thing called heaven, but I didn't really know what that was. And so I started looking into it, and I go into this story in great detail in my book, Love and the Afterlife. But the short version is I had a mediumship reading and I was like, this is something I couldn't have explained before now, but this person who there's no way she could have known any of this stuff reported information to me that seemed like I spent the hour with my mom. And so I went back to grad school and the other students and the other professors, and I told them about my experience over the weekend, and most of them said, well, I don't know anything about that, but that sounds like you had a really interesting experience. But there was one guy in particular, and he was like, nah, those are all frauds. Those are all con artists. You got duped. And I was like, no, I was there. That is not what happened. And I came to realize that that was the sort of the common reaction from people who just like, that's what they've heard. So that's what they think is true, is that there's no way that a medium can communicate with your departed loved one. So they must all be con artists. And I was like, no, I was there. That is exactly not what happened. I'm going to bring this into the lab and test it under controlled conditions and see what happens. And the universe is like, oh, really? Because here is a postdoc that you will do for 4 years. And then you will do this for the rest of your life. That was like the path that I got pushed on. And that was in, I don't know, 2003, maybe. So I've been doing that ever since.
Was there one standout thing this medium said that was your, oh my God, how did they know that one thing?
No, it was actually several things, and I go through those in that chapter, but it was like, that was her manner of death. It was like this interesting thing about, she said she wanted it to be the Brady Bunch, but it wasn't. And she said something about a station wagon. And in my head, I remembered, like, we did have like all families in the 70s, we had a big station wagon with the back seat that faced backwards. And I had left a big giant kindergarten crayon in the station wagon, and in the Phoenix summer, it melted into the carpet. And so when the medium said station wagon, I was like screaming in my head, green crayon, green crayon. She didn't make any mention of any of that. So the fact that she didn't get what I was trying to put out psychically, that was like something that I thought was very interesting, because it was like, oh, she's not just reading my mind, right? That's the alternative explanation, is she's just reading your mind. Oh, just reading my mind? That very simple thing we all can do? No. Before I knew what I was doing, that was my little experiment that I did. And there were things that I didn't even know that I had to check with my mom's sisters about, because they're all from Cincinnati, and then we moved to Phoenix when I was like 3. And so there were a lot of things just that I didn't have any knowledge of, where people were buried and the details of funerals and that sort of thing. And that when I checked with my aunts, those things were true and meaningful. So I thought that was another interesting thing. But it really was, I really felt like I had spent the time with her. I really felt like that was an experience with her. And walking away from that reading, like, it was weird how weird it wasn't. It was just like, yeah, hung out with my dead mom today. It was very matter of fact and real.
Yeah, I can relate to so much of what you said. So tell us, what is Windbridge and when did you start it?
Okay. So after I got my PhD in pharmacology and toxicology, I took a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Arizona, and I studied mediums there for 4 years and published an accuracy testing paper. And then my postdoc was funded by one generous fella for all 4 years. And then he was like, I don't have any more money to give to this. And so I looked into could I stay at the university? And everyone was like it was very supportive, that environment, because they were good scientists, and we don't have preconceived notions. Good scientists don't have preconceived notions about what is or isn't possible. We just follow the data. And they were like, if you can have independent funding, you can stay here. They were very helpful, but it didn't work out. The details never lined up. So my husband, Mark Boccuzzi, and I were like, well, this research needs to be done. What should we do? We looked in all of these different things. And then the only option left was, we need to go out on our own, and we need to create an independent research organization. So that was in 2008. We founded the Windbridge Institute. And at that time, we were interested in so many things. We wanted to study psi in general, telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, and psychokinesis, and survival of consciousness related topics like mediumship. We just want to do everything. And then by 2017, we weren't really serving any audience well, because we were trying to serve everybody. So we branched the survival of consciousness afterlife research into a second organization called the Windbridge Research Center, which is a 501c3 public charity. So from that point on, 2017, all the mediumship research took place at the center.
And I just want to touch on one thing you said about follow the data, because I remember very early on, and I kept telling myself, this can't be true. None of this is true. There's no way consciousness could survive bodily death, despite the studies I was reading, getting my own mediumship readings. And you wrote a line that really kind of let myself process this. I'm going to not quote you perfectly, but it was, what if we put aside all preconceived notions and just follow the data? And anyone listening, once I was able to do that, and thank you, Dr. Beischel, because that was just so helpful to let myself actually process what I was seeing. So anyone who is in the process of hoping all this is true, Just that's the scientific thing to do.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, so you have certified a variety of media, or I should say, a tightly selected group of mediums. What is the certification process?
So it's quite complex, and you can look at it on the Windbridge Research website. If you go to the About Us, the mediums is listed in the About Us, and you can read about the certification has 8 steps. It's peer reviewed. In 2007, I published a paper about methods in mediumship research, and I listed the 8 steps, and the paper got peer reviewed. So it's a peer reviewed certification system, and we do interviews and they fill out questionnaires. But the big piece is step 5, which is accuracy testing. So we received a grant to basically create a stable of mediums that we could continue to do research with. And so through that grant, my stable at its height was 20 mediums. And when the grant was over, we stopped certifying mediums because we didn't have the time or the funding to do it anymore. And so we continue to just work with that stable of 20 mediums. And 2 have retired. So now we have 18 and 1 is anonymous, but you can see the other 17. And if you're interested in a reading, and we'll talk about more about what that entails, you can go to windbridge.org and see the list of Windbridge certified research mediums. But so the step 5 testing of the medium's accuracy, they participate in, we refer to as quintuple-blind readings, where there's no normal way they could get the information. It can't be hot reading. It can't be cold reading. They can't look anything up. They can't read your cues. The readings take place over the phone. The experimenter serving as a proxy doesn't know anything about you or your deceased person. So I'm that experimenter. I can't cue the medium. The joke is like the medium starts to go, well, I think the cause of death is like something about the head. And I'm like, you mean breast cancer? Good. I can't spin it because I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. So it's just the medium and I on the phone. All we have is the first name of the departed. And I ask specific questions. What did the person look like? What was their personality? What are their hobbies or activities, and how did they die? And then do they have any specific messages for the absent sitter? So they can't just be like, your person loved you and they miss you 100%, right? We're asking very specific, because that's one form of cold reading, is you just say things so general it could apply to nearly anyone. So we ask for very specific information, and then when we transcribe the recordings of those and we formatted it into itemized list, like numbered list of items. And then each absent sitter gets 2. One is theirs and one is somebody else's, and we don't tell them which is which. And they score for accuracy each item in each reading. And then we say, okay, and also pick which one you think is yours. And so it's multiple ways of looking at it. And so at the center, at the Windbridge Research Center, our mission is to use controlled world-class science and then create free educational materials to help people like you at that time learn about what do scientists really know about this. So we, on the education tab of our website at windbridge.org, there's a bunch of fact sheets. And so there's a fact sheet about testing medium's accuracy under controlled conditions. And it goes through the 5 levels of blinding, and it goes through the findings from our research. We did enough research that we had 58 readings with those 20 mediums. But then there's also people have replicated our work. So I did the first study at the University of Arizona, and then I replicated it and extended that protocol at Windbridge, and then other people, independent researchers, have replicated it since then. And I think it's like there's now 112 mediumship research readings in the literature. And together, those demonstrate that, lo and behold, mediums can report accurate and specific information about the deceased without any prior knowledge about either the sitters or the discarnate beyond the discarnate's first name. So it's not like just me at a microphone saying, no, mediums are real. Like there's peer-reviewed research. And I'm quick to point out, like our protocols peer-reviewed like over 4 times. It got reviewed when we submitted it as a grant project to the funding organization, and then they accepted it. It got reviewed when they approved our final report. It got approved when we presented it at a peer-reviewed meeting, academic meeting, and then it got peer-reviewed before it got published. So it's not like it's just, I didn't just write it down and then say it's real. Experts who understand the scientific method approved that this is real and that this happened. And, I used to kind of have it say like the data the data suggests, but like, no, we're beyond that now. It's real. And scientists never say proven, but the data are strong that mediums can report accurate and specific information about the deceased with no prior knowledge and without using any shenanigans.
Why is it you sit in for the sitters and you don't know who the sitters are as well, correct?
Correct.
So now why is it you're sitting there and getting all the information instead of the sitter themselves?
Because by me sitting in as what's called a proxy sitter, it allows us to keep the sitter blind to which reading is theirs. If they heard it, they would know it was their reading. And so what we want to do is give them 2 readings so they score what's called a target reading, which was intended for them, and then a decoy reading that was intended for someone else without knowing which was which. And that prevents what's called rater bias, or at least equalizes rater bias. So some people are more skeptical than others, and they may, not, unless it was like a huge hit, they would never say it was right. And then some people are like, yeah, everything is right. Yeah, I sort of had a cousin named Fred, right? They just would give everything an accurate scoring. So what we do when we give everybody 2 readings is it equalizes that rater bias. And so in order to keep the sitter blind to which reading was theirs, they can't hear the reading as it takes place. So then I serve as the proxy sitter. It's called the proxy sitter because the mediums trust me and I have the questions and I'm collecting the data. I'm recording the reading. I'm formatting it into a list of items. So the way that it works is there's 5 levels of blinding, 3 experimenters, the sitter is blind and the medium is blind. So the way that we did it, Mark was experimenter 1. And so he consented the sitters and got the names of the deceased, all those sorts of things at the beginning when the people were signing up to participate in research.
You say names of the deceased. It was only the first name, not a full name.
Correct. And he got it from them on the phone and he only ever wrote it down. So it wasn't anywhere electronic at that time. So no one could hack our system and get the names or whatever. And, what can the name tell you? Then all you have is first name, and then you have to say the personality, the physical description, the hobbies, the cause of death, and the specific messages for that specific sitter. And skeptics will say, oh yeah, you can get a lot from the name. And so our response is, oh yeah, prove it and show your work. Show where you took that name, answered those questions accurately, and where you found that information. Because everybody's a little bit psychic, so you can't just use a skeptic and go, oh yeah, it didn't work, because they too are a little bit medium, right? So the only way that you can control for these other things is to have the medium score a control reading, which shouldn't have anything to do with them. But there's just so much. There's so much. Because what we found is about 30% of any reading can apply to nearly anyone. People are only so different. So there are going to be things in your reading that would totally apply to other people because people are only so different and relationships with loved ones are only so different. So people shouldn't expect that it's going to be like 100% unique information that only apply. I make the jokes all the time, like, unless your person was born on Mars and, has 2 heads and died from falling in a volcano, the stuff the medium says is going to be applicable to other people as well.
Right. And then when it all comes together, though, and it's like 90, 80% applies to your person, and maybe one specific thing, that's where it kind of becomes, okay, this is me, right?
Yeah, I mean, as a scientist, what we are interested in is just like the collection. So with the 58 readings by 20 mediums, we saw an effect. And that's what's interesting. But yeah, on the ground, people, an individual person, what you're looking for is, does it feel like you spent that time with your person? And, people shouldn't be. I write 3 different chapters in my book, Love in the Afterlife, about what people can do to be a good sitter, because it's not going to work. There are 3 people involved in a mediumship reading. The medium is only one of them. The other 2 are your departed loved one and you. And you have to do your jobs too. So 3 chapters in the book: what you should do before, what you should do during, and what you should do after a mediumship reading in order to make it successful. There's a lot of, you can't just walk in and think that like the medium's going to do her job. Like, no, this is a collection it's a person connecting you with your deceased loved one. Like this, it's a loving relationship, and this person is going to help you reconnect. And that's all you should be looking for. There's no testing. You will never be able to employ all the controls that I have employed. We need like 7 sitters before we can find a good pair. You need 3 experimenters. You have to have a decoy. You can't hear the reading as it takes place. Like, don't worry about the testing. I've done the testing. Worry about, this is an opportunity for you to get to spend time with someone you loved that has died. And that's what it should be. Don't try and test anybody. Don't try and fake anybody out. Don't try and use any codes. Oh, I'll know it's real if. No. Did you do all of those?
Everything I did. I did 100% of those for like the first year. So I'm just laughing while you're saying this. And then the mediums did get my code a few times, but I would be so dejected that the times they didn't. I'm like, that's the one thing I wanted. Yeah, I was laughing reading your book, because everything you're like, don't do this. I'm like, me.
Yeah, and it's because it's such a unique situation. We of course want to apply our everyday logic to it, but it's not an everyday thing. So you have to like really step aside from yourself and really be mindful of what your expectations are and what your assumptions are, and go into it with the right frame of mind. Why are you even doing it? I say, if you've ever said a medium should be able to, then probably it's not good. It's not for you. If you were like, what I'd like to do, I'd like to reconnect with my person that died, and I think a medium could help, maybe you'd make a good sitter. But you do have to put in the work in order for it to work well.
And I noticed they do defy, in my readings I was getting, they were defying the laws of the universe, just not in the way that I was expecting they should be. But they were still getting, the good ones were still, I could not explain what they were doing.
Yeah, and doesn't that make what you think are the laws of the universe aren't laws? It's like what you were taught, but it's not right. It turns out that it's what's real is that love is eternal and so strong that mediums can feel it even under blinded conditions. So what we can conclude from the accuracy testing is the mediums can report accurate and specific information about the deceased. But with the accuracy testing alone, we cannot conclude that it's from the deceased. We can't say they're communicating with the deceased. We're saying they said true things about the deceased, but that's as far as we can go with just accuracy testing.
Where else could it be coming from if it's not the deceased?
It could be, quote, simple psi, simple telepathy, clairvoyance, and precognition. So one of the explanations is, when you told them what their scores were, they look into the future for when you told them what their scores were, and then they said those things from the future. So we never give our mediums individual feedback about their readings and their individual statements to prevent that from happening. The other theories are like, they're looking at, documents in clairvoyantly in someone's attic, or they're reading your mind using telepathy. But whatever it is, they're using psychic ability. So they're either communicating with a survived consciousness of your deceased loved one, or they're using regular, normal psychic functioning to use these other things to gather information about the deceased and then spinning it to sound like they're communicating with someone in order to make money. That's the theory.
If they truly, genuinely have abilities where they're reading someone's mind, that is so remarkable and still defies the laws of the universe.
Exactly.
So
Oh, they're just reading your mind? Oh, it's just that? Okay.
I'm like, I can't do that. And that also is showing that somehow information is stored and communicated non-locally and out of a body. And if there is a functionality that information can be stored that way, why wouldn't consciousness? That's what I always think too.
Yeah. And well, my question is, because, you know, the rule of thumb is all mediums are psychic, but not all psychics are mediums. And so my question is, well, if it's so easy to, you know, read someone's mind and then spin it as that they're talking to your dead person, why aren't all psychics mediums? If they're just faking it, then I bet mediums make more money than psychics. Why don't they all just do it? So right there, like the logic doesn't pan out. And then we tested it under blinded conditions. So what we did was we used our same quintuple blind protocol, but some of the first names we gave to the mediums at the start of the reading were living people and some were deceased people. And they didn't know which were which. They didn't even know they were going to get one of each. They just knew some readings are going to be living people, some are going to be deceased people. And like my mediums are very scientifically minded, and they're like, how are you going to see an effect if everybody? I was like, it will wash out in the numbers. Like we'll get to see it, but this, you know, what it really was they each read one of each. So they got a name, they did a reading. What does the person look like? What's their personality? What are their hobbies or activities? And then at the end, they filled out this standardized questionnaire called the Phenomenology of Consciousness Inventory. And they fill out these items, and then their results allow us to quantify 26 different dimensions of their consciousness. So it lets us see, like, what was their memory recall of the experience when it was over? What about the passage of time? Did they feel like they had an altered experience? 26 different things. And the two reading, when we unblinded the data to ourselves, the two conditions were very similar, which we expected because they're both psychic functioning, but there was one thing that was different statistically. And that of the 26 dimensions of consciousness, the one thing that was statistically different was love. And so the mediums experienced more love when they were reporting the answers to those questions about a deceased person than when they were reporting the answers about a living person. Again, not knowing which was which, not even knowing there would be one of each. And then we also collected data where we just asked them to talk about that. And it's very clear in their experiences that communicating with a deceased person feels different than acquiring psychic information about the living. So they know what psychic information feels like. And this isn't it. This feels like communication. And we'd seen that before in previous qualitative research where they describe the deceased person as separate volitional being who like can surprise them, make them laugh. So they don't experience it as dead information. They experience it as a dead person. It's a person communicating with them. And so if you take the accuracy testing plus this idea that the two experiences are different, then based on the data, you have to conclude they're communicating with the survived consciousness of our deceased loved ones.
Oh, I still get chills when I hear this. It's just, obviously we all hope this, and it's so nice to be able to go past hope into actual data.
I gotta say, we don't all hope this. I think when Mark and I started doing this research, we were like, I take comfort in the idea that like when you die, everything, it's just over and we don't have to worry about anything anymore. It's over. And so when we started to get this data, we were like, oh no, there is an afterlife. Who knew? Yeah.
Oh no! Actually, that makes me feel so good to hear because you're not bringing wishful thinking to your conclusions.
And like I had a really bad childhood and relationship with my mother. And so I did not need her in my life anymore. And so I didn't need for an afterlife to be real. If she was dead and gone, that would have been fine with me. But I'm a good scientist and I followed the data and it said that's not what it is. It is that she's still around. And 20 years later, when I was writing this book, Love in the Afterlife, and working on this pack of meditation cards called Guidance for Grief, I was like, well, I better walk the talk. And so I was like, okay, it's 20 years, but I think, Mom, I'm ready to start having a relationship with you. And all kinds of things started happening. And so it's never too late. And even if you had a bad relationship, people, they're not instantaneously perfect beings on the other side, but 20 years, you can grow and learn and change. And so I just want people to know it's never too late to try and establish what we call a continuing bond with your departed loved ones.
Love that. And there's another study I remember reading early on. You scanned mediums' brains when they did a psychic reading versus a medium reading versus making up a story. Am I correct about that?
Not entirely. I want to make sure that we're clear about this. So we did EEG, we collected EEG, and we asked the mediums to enter 4 different states. We weren't doing actual readings. They just were like quiet in the dark with the EEG cap on. And we said, and they were just instructed to enter these 4 different states. So the first was recollection. So think about a living person that they know. Perception, listen while I described a person, while I read facts about a person. Fabrication, think about a person that they made up in their head. And then communication, communicate with a deceased person that you know. So prior to the experiment, they all agreed to have an agreement with their own deceased people from their family that they would show up during the experiment. So they did recollection, perception, fabrication, and communication. So we were collecting data. We had no way to prove that they were actually in communication with their own deceased loved ones during that session. But, some of them cried, and you could tell that mentally they were having that experience. And so what we were collecting data, EEG data, while they entered those 4 different mental states. There was no way for us to prove that they were in any of those states, but that's what they were instructed to do. And then what we found was that the experience of communicating with the deceased was different, was distinct, and that it wasn't consistent with brain activity during just like regular thinking or imagination. So it didn't look like any of those things. If it was close to any of them, it would have been perception. It would have been like that you were experiencing novel information. It wasn't like that you were recalling information you looked up. It wasn't that you made up something, or you just were creating information out of thin air. What it looked like was perception, that you were listening to someone talk to you is what it looked like.
The mediumship. Fascinating. And there's another study that you wrote in your book, and I remember you speaking about when I went to your talk at Omega, and it involves remote viewing and an insight into what is going on the other side, or what it is like. Would you mind sharing that study?
Yeah, so that study is the brainchild of my husband, Mark Boccuzzi, and he did a presentation about it for our Windbridge Research Center Afterlife Symposium a couple years ago. And so if you go to windbridge.org and you just search the word VISTA, you can find his presentation that has all the data. But essentially what it is that he used the methods of remote viewing. And so in remote viewing, the remote viewer is tasked with reporting information about a target when they're only given a target ID, which is just an alphanumeric code. They don't know anything. It could be anything. It could be a military base. It could be the future. It could be where there's water underground on this plot of land. It could be anything. And so what Mark did was he assigned those codes to physical life and the afterlife. And he tasked trained remote viewers in reporting information. I describe some of the details in the book. The cover of my book, I used the words that the remote viewers reported that the afterlife was like, and I put it in a image generation software, and it turned the words into a picture. And I love the picture, and it's beautiful. But the things that the remote viewers talked about, again, totally blinded. All they had was an ID number, but they used words like forever, vast, and intriguing. The physical life target was like Mark saying at his computer. And when they read that one, they were like a black box, electrical equipment, a fan. Like they got that. It was very clear that that's what they were reading. And then we said, okay, now read this other one. Again, all they had was a number. And they reported this like beautiful, expansive, compassionate, loving place. And again, it could have been anything. That ID number could have been anything. And the place they described sounded so amazing. And so in my book, my theory is, well, if you wanted to know about like playing the stock market, you'd ask people who were good at it, what they did. So I'm saying, if you want to learn to connect with the other side, let's ask the mediums. And so we have data about the specific personality characteristics of mediums. And so you can work to be more those things, like compassionate, agreeable, conscientious, and mindful. And then you may be more in tune with the other side. So it may be easier for your person to get to you. Like if you're just stomping around angry all the time, I bet it's harder for your people to get to you and to give you messages. So chapter 8 is my favorite chapter, and it's all the ways and all the things that you can do, the simple things that you can do to sort of be more in tune with the other side, so that maybe your energy like lines up and it's easier for them to get to you. And it's something we can all do. We don't have to be mediums to connect with the other side. And there's plenty of data about what are called spontaneous after-death communication experiences, where people just, everyday people regularly have these experiences. The most common one is just called sense of presence. People just feel like they're with their departed loved one. Maybe more extreme cases that you see something, apparition, or you hear the voice, or you feel touched, but sense of presence is really common, and you just feel like the person was with you.
Yeah, I definitely have that a lot with a few of my people that I miss. And, one thing that I want to bring up that you address in your book is loss of animals. And I think you mentioned how dismissed that is with people. And I've lost animals, and it's just crushing. So it was so kind of relieving and validating to see you address that. So I'd love to just touch it. I know you've mentioned some remarkable visitations people had from animals, and also mediums can connect with animals, correct?
Definitely. Often animals will show up. Like people will go to a medium and want to connect with their departed human loved one, and animals will show up with that person. So that's how we first were like, well, wait, they're just showing up spontaneously. Let's look at it specifically. And so we got a small grant to use our same quintuple-blind protocol, but instead of deceased people as targets, we had deceased animals and deceased companion animals. And we ran, I think, 5 or 6 readings, and the data were strong, but we had to close the study because it was so hard for people, because it's not 100%. You're not directly in touch with the person. You have to read a transcript of a reading. We were like, this is undue suffering. We're making people relive this loss. And so we closed that data, but the data we did collect looked strong. The mediums could report accurate and specific information about specific animals under blinded conditions. So it's just, love is love. It doesn't matter the species. People can still feel connected in all the different ways that people feel connected to their human loved ones. You can feel connected to your departed animals. And same thing. Yeah, the sense of presence. So I wrote about, it's because it's such a different relationship. Our relationships with our animals are basically purely physical. It's just sort of, we just get to be together. They don't know our favorite color. They don't remember our stories about high school, right? We're just together. We just sit together and touch. And so it's that sort of thing that you can experience, like just feel the nearness of your departed animal, like just like you would if they were still alive. I can't tell you any specific stories because I'll just start crying.
Well, your book had some amazing ones, and I know your website has.
Yeah, it does have some.
What would you say is the biggest what the fuck that you've seen in terms of study, in terms of any experiences?
I don't think it was one specific time. I think it was just that it keeps happening. Like it keeps being real. Every time we do it, the mediums are able to report accurate and specific information about the deceased. And so it's not surprising anymore because I just expect it because it's real. So everything is randomized and controlled and blinded in our studies. And so one time we were doing the scheduled readings, and I was doing 2 different readings with 2 different mediums, and it happened to be that the deceased people for those 2 readings had the same first name. And so I literally just opened my planner up with the 2 names and the 2 mediums' names. And I just like sort of looked at this guy like, I don't know, you figure it out. But the one medium got sick and she was like, oh, I can't do it today. And she rescheduled. So the joke was like, oh, the deceased struck the medium down with illness. But no, they didn't have to share the day. It was 2 different days that those 2 people with the same first name got to talk to 2 different mediums. And, even with cases like that, like the data are still strong. It's things like that, like, oh, this is under none of my control. This is totally out of my hands. And these deceased people are going to do whatever they're going to do whenever they're going to do it. So I'm continually grateful that it keeps working because it keeps working. And even like I said, this recently independent group in Italy did a similar protocol with Italian mediums and sitters, and they found the same thing. It was the results were similar to what we found. So it's just like, yep, it's not surprising anymore, like, because it's real. It'd be like, yep, every time I throw something up, it falls down. Gravity is still real. It's like that.
Yeah, I kind of relate, except I'll get a medium reading or watch group ones or see remote viewing or OBE's other phenomenon. I don't get chills to the level I did in the beginning. I wish I did, but there are moments I'm just like, I am watching someone completely defining the most remarkable scientific, like paradigm shifting data that I could ever fathom. And it just like the profundity of that will hit me. And it's amazing, this stuff.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
Mark told me that early on in your learning about all this stuff, you thought that I was a fabrication of like some military industrial complex, that somebody had made me up and trying to hawk the truth of mediumship, and that I wasn't even a real person. Is that right?
Oh, that's hilarious. And that is going in my next book. I thought there was a possibility that you and the Windbridge mediums were one author who was writing books. At that point, before I wrote a book, I was like, books must make so much money. I have learned that's not necessarily the case.
No.
So I thought there was one person who was an author who was like, well, if I write about mediumship and make up a person who's a scientist and pretend to be all these mediums that are certified by the scientist, and I'm one person who gives readings, then I will have this incredibly lucrative business. And I am so glad I didn't actually do background checks, because now that I've met you, that would be so awkward to be like, by the way, I would feel like I was being deceptive not telling someone that I background checked them. But I was close. I started researching and I found videos of you. I found videos of Laura. I'm like, okay. And I was like, first, like took all of your photos and put them into stock. Google of like you and other Windbridge. I was like, okay, they're all different people. And then I was like, okay, I think they're all real people.
But seriously, if someone were to create a scientist, don't you think the person they created would have been a man? If you were trying to get some shit past skeptics, don't you think you would have had a dude do it?
Unfortunately, and I'm so enraged. You're saying that because that's so true. It'd be like a white, like 45 to 50-year-old, like square-jawed, like waspy man, which is so enraging to think about, but that's so true.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And something hopefully will change.
Don't get me started.
That's another topic, and I could just, it gets me so angry. And hopefully that's another thing that will shift. But speaking of irritating things, to me, this is the most paradigm shifting thing. And I spent a couple of years, early grief, just thinking, once I established you were a real human and all of the others, like Laura and Joanne and all of you were real humans, I just kept delving in further and further. I even reached out to skeptics and said, can I send you my medium readings? And can you tell me how they could possibly be doing this? This is the list of, controls I took. And I would get just absurd emails back, like mediums all cheat. You shouldn't be paying them. I was like, but you didn't address any of my questions. I would even pay you for your time to help me troubleshoot. And no one took me up on that offer.
Yeah, that does not surprise me.
Because I just thought, well, I don't think I'm stupid, but I assume there's, obviously a layer of scientists and people and skeptics who are a lot smarter than me. And they were seeing something that I was not capable of understanding. Just the way if I saw a magic trick, I can't tell you how it's done, but a magician can. So I thought I was missing something. And I have come to conclude that I am not. Why do you think? I mean, this is just, sometimes I'm at a loss of words when I talk about this stuff because it is so profound. It's as if we discovered life on another planet or broke the speed of light barrier and string theory of other dimensions. Why are the biggest scientists not rushing this data?
I think it's because, well, the human brain does not like change. And depending on literally on your neurology, some people who usually identify as more conservative versus people who identify as more liberal, people who think of themselves as liberal, when they're faced with new information, the frontal cortex of their brain lights up like, oh, that is interesting. But people who are more conservative and skeptical, when they're faced with new information, literally the amygdala lights up and it tells the body we're in danger. And so these new ideas literally make people feel like their life is being threatened. So it's like neurologically, physiologically impossible for those people to rationally read these papers and accept it that something is different than what they've always believed. It takes someone very specific to be able to go, yeah, this is different, and I don't know, and it's different from everything that I've always heard, but I'll follow the data and look at the methods and land where the data point me. And that, like, not everyone can do that. And that's unfortunate because if you could, it would really alleviate your suffering about your own death, about the deaths of the people and animals that you love. I don't need you to believe this, but you'd feel better in your life if you did. And so it's unfortunate, but people are stuck in their dogma and they don't want to, they fear change. Humans fear change. All humans fear change. And so it's different and they don't like it. And so they just won't even entertain the idea that it could even be possible. They won't even look because it can't be possible. So I'm not even going to look. I'm not going to waste my time. That's what we hear a lot. And so I'm not arguing with those people because I think some of them, at least neurologically, they couldn't even entertain what I have to say anyway.
That makes so much sense. I never really heard the neurological argument, but that also ties into what we were just saying about that, just this horrible sexism and, idealized white male, that people are having such a hard time getting past that. The thing that stood out to me, especially reaching out to skeptics who said they were dedicated to this, and I guess I am dedicated to this, but if I was dedicated from a skeptic, I guess I am from a skeptic perspective, and the data is just so strong. But if that's why I just couldn't understand that they were skeptics, they were using all their time focusing on mediumship, and then I would think they would just be so excited getting every bit of data and just keep a constant curiosity and open-mindedness, which I think if you're pursuing a certain avenue, that's what you always need to do. I mean, if someone's just like, I don't believe any of this, and they're doing a trillion other things, and this isn't where their focus is, who cares? But if this is where your focus is, and grieving people are turning to you. And
keep in mind that people who identify as skeptics and they make their living being skeptical, they would lose their job if they changed their mind. So they can't. But whereas a scientist, we follow the data wherever it goes. But a person who identifies as a skeptic, they'll never be able to say it's something else, because that they're making a living saying this is all bullshit. So to change your mind that's literally career suicide. Your meal ticket is gone if you change your mind. Like, how can you trust someone for the truth who cannot change their mind?
I think of that article Michael Shermer wrote. I'll link to it in the show notes. And for anyone who doesn't know who he is, he's a well-known skeptic. And he shared a fascinating anomalous experience. And instead of his audience responding like, wow, we've trusted you for years and this is really interesting and you've given us no reason to not trust you, this makes me curious, they attacked him.
Yeah, they were like, apparently you have become mentally ill.
And how can you explore anything open-mindedly if that's how you're attacked?
Yeah, whatever I find, I'm still a scientist. Whatever I find. I was surprised, as like, I'm a hardcore scientist. And when we got those results from where the one factor that was different in the blinded living and deceased target readings was love, oh, that's so woo-woo. Now I have to follow the love, like, oh, love, it's all touchy-feely, like that's so not my personality, but that's where the data pointed. And when I looked into it, lo and behold, love is a huge component of end-of-life experiences in the dying. And like, people in hospice are heavily studied, and there's a lot of love there. Near-death experiences, a lot of love there. Out-of-body experience, like all these things, like it was all pointing like, oh, this is it. This is the cornerstone of the afterlife. And if we want to be connected to it, we have to bring love into our lives. Yeah, I think if I was going to sum up my findings, how can you optimize the possibility that you'll connect with your departed loved ones? It would basically be, don't be a dick. Like, no one is a dick in the afterlife, I'm pretty sure.
That's what I have a hard time understanding. Like, there are some people in this world who are just such assholes. I'm sure you and I agree on a lot of them, certain politicians, and I'm pretty open about my views about that on this podcast. Are you just a terrible person and you cross over and you just become a wonderful person? That's what I can't wrap my mind around.
No. Oh, no. I don't think that's what happens at all. And my colleagues, Pam Heath and John Climo, wrote a book many years ago called Handbook to the Afterlife. And they looked through all this, like channel information, mediumship readings, near-death experiences, all these things. And they were like, this is what the afterlife is. And one of the big things they found was that you're still learning, you're still growing. You don't just show up and you've died. Your physical body has died, but you're going to keep going and keep exploring and keep learning things and keep working on yourself. So no, I assume those people that you're talking about have a harder time. I bet they don't just get to like sit back and relax right away. They probably have classes to take and agreements to sign and things like that, because it's so different. Then there's, I think in that book, they said something like, people who are awful, they're going to have a harder time because they aren't going to fit in over there. And it's going to be quite a shock to the system when you get there and it's this beautiful, accepting, everybody's loving and compassionate and wants the best for each other. Like, you aren't going to fit in if you're a dick. And you're going to have to make a lot of changes. So it's probably easier if you try and make those changes now.
That makes so much more sense that it's only everyone instantly becomes loving, because I'll hear that. I'm like, oh, that sounds like such bullshit.
No, I don't even know how that would even be possible. So we talked about the difference between medium and psychic, right? And the mediums know the difference. And they're like, when I do a mediumship reading and I'm talking to the departed, it isn't psychic. I know what psychic is and it's not that. We've covered those differences. But then there's the idea of, how is it even possible for consciousness to survive? Because none of this matters if you can't do that. So I think what people don't realize, because there are two theories and they're just theories. So the one theory is the survival of consciousness, that after the physical body dies, consciousness can continue to exist in some form. And then the alternative, again, theory, is called scientific materialism, and it is the dominant paradigm. It's what they teach in medical schools. It's what everybody knows, but it's just a theory. And so scientific materialism is the idea that the brain makes consciousness. So when the brain dies, consciousness is gone. And there's data to support that theory because when we fuck with the brain, consciousness gets fucked up too, right? When you have stroke or you have injury, or even when you're sleeping, your brain is different. And so your consciousness is different. But it would be like if you swung a baseball bat at your TV and you're like, oh, the picture is gone. That means the TV made the picture. No, it doesn't. So it's the same thing. Like you can hurt the brain and consciousness can get screwed up, but it's also possible that the brain isn't making consciousness. It's just a receiver of consciousness that is what we call non-local. It's not localized to the brain. It exists somehow and somewhere else, and the brain serves as a antenna basically and keeps it associated with this brain and this body. But non-local consciousness and scientific materialism are both theories. And I think there's way more data to support non-local consciousness and the survival of consciousness after death than there is to support materialism. And people have written lots of books about the common understanding is materialism is on its way out. It doesn't explain all the things that need explaining. And it's dominant now. It's what everybody believes, and it's what they're teaching in graduate schools and medical schools, but it doesn't describe the whole picture. Non-local consciousness does describe the whole picture.
And now here's kind of a fun question. So someone gives you unlimited funds. What would be a study you would do?
Oh my gosh. Well, what we really need to know is if consciousness is non-local, how is it interacting with the brain? Where in the brain is it interacting? So there's lots of studies that I would need to collect a team of people. I couldn't do that. I'm not a neurologist. I'm good at protocol design, but I'm not a neurologist. So that would be super interesting to like tease apart where that connection happens. And that's where I would start. I really have always wanted to do this massive grief study where we look at the 4 types of after-death communication that I describe in my book. So there's spontaneous, like the sense of feeling, the sense of presence. We call mediumship readings assisted after-death communication because you didn't directly experience the communication. Someone else did, the medium, and they assisted you in your experience of connecting with your departed loved one. There's facilitated, which involves a clinical scenario, and then requested. And so I would want to see, and we can talk about requested in a minute, but I would want to see how those things affect in like a randomized controlled trial, how those things affect grief, those after-death communication experiences. So we really can get it sort of on the books, like this is helpful for grief when kind of nothing else is. And we can start training people on how to do these things. And, you know, your doctor would ask you, oh, you suffered a loss. Have you thought about requested after-death communication experiences? Like that it could become part of the norm and part of our healthcare system. That's what I would love. So when you win the lottery, you're going to fund those 2 studies for me?
I was about to say, let's manifest something when my billions come in from my book. And who knows what else? I do startups one day, hopefully.
Who knows?
I would happily fund this.
Wonderful.
Or win the lottery. I will take that.
Yeah, we can't say how the miracles happen. We just say what we want to happen, right? We can't drive the how.
Exactly.
But I want to talk about requested after-death communication. So we talk about spontaneous, it just happens, as the name implies, spontaneously. Dreams are often spontaneous ADCs. And then facilitated requires a clinician in a specific protocol. Assisted is a mediumship reading. And then requested is when you do something in order to create a situation in which an after-death communication happens. So I was 20 years into my research and I was like, this is strong research. These are good protocols. This is good data. This isn't changing the world like I'd hoped. And so I was like, how can I reach people directly? So I wrote this book, Love and the Afterlife, available in Kindle and paperback on Amazon. And I developed
It's really good. I just finished it.
Thank you. And I developed this meditation deck of cards many years ago, and then a international publisher picked it up. And so now these cards, which it's called Guidance for Grief, Wisdom to Help You Stay Connected to Your Loved Ones After Loss, also available on Amazon. And so what the Guidance for Grief cards do is you shuffle them and you pick one every day. And some of the cards are signs. So it says, today I'll be on the lookout for insects, and I'll accept that that's a sign from my loved one. And there's a bunch of different signs. And so that way it employs the power of synchronicity and randomness that you and your deceased person can have this miraculous experience. Like, oh, this card got called and then I saw a butterfly. Like, oh, now it's a little easier to feel like it's meaningful than if you just like, yep, that's a butterfly. And it's hard to determine what's things, like all signs are usually mundane, everyday things. Like you can't have a sign where like the laws of physics are broken. Like, oh, I got a sign from my loved one and Mars now revolves around the moon. Like, no.
Those are the types of signs I asked for in the beginning. I was like, I want to find an alive, not a toy, pink and purple turtle that walks through my room. I was like, okay, now I know they probably have to work within the laws of physics.
Yeah, like that's impossible. That couldn't happen. That's impossible what you were asking for. So you can't do that. So these signs in the cards, they're possible things that people have who report spontaneous experiences report a lot of the times. So it's things that are possible and that could happen. A sign has to be something that could happen. It couldn't be, I'm so sorry that you did that you tried to get, like, I'm not going to believe it till the impossible happens.
Right. I mean, I think I was just doing lots of different tests and experiments and I was seeing things defied, but I definitely, as I said, I did every single thing a sitter shouldn't in terms of like being too skeptical, not in terms of ever giving my information or more information. And then I asked for like, yeah, I was like, well, if you're defying the laws of the universe by surviving, then I need a sign that defies the laws of the universe. But I ended up getting such remarkable signs, as well as, I mean, a trillion other things that happened, as well as your studies. So, I mean, it was a build-up and a slow one. And I still, on my griefy days, I'm like, oh, God, there's a catch and I'm missing it. But I don't even think anymore. My worry, and I just would like your opinion about this too. My worry no longer is, oh, mediums are cheating. I know the ones I know are not. Or that this stuff that happened didn't happen and it's a magic trick. I worry now that physics is going to find an explanation that has not yet been discovered that explains everything that's happened. And the answer is not survival.
I can't say that that's not going to happen. That's the other reason why people are skeptical of these things, because there's no defined mechanism. We can't say, oh, this is how consciousness can survive death. It just seems like it can. It's just something consciousness can do. But there's lots of things we don't understand how they work. Like my training is in pharmacology, and there are dozens of drugs on the market that we don't know how they work. If you look it up, it'll say mechanism of action unknown. But they keep making them, they keep selling them, and it keeps helping people. So there's lots of things. We don't know why people yawn. We don't know why people dream. Like there's lots of things in your everyday life science can't explain. And so it is logical to believe things that don't have a mechanism because they're all around you. And we don't know how this can happen. I don't have an answer for how this can happen. But it seems like it's just something consciousness can do. Like you were saying, it breaks the laws of the universe, but it doesn't. We just have to broaden the laws of the universe. Clearly, this is happening. Clearly, the deceased loved ones are surviving and staying in contact with us and connecting with us and talking to mediums and sending us signs and having you pull the right card that you need to hear today from the Guidance for Grief deck. Like those things are real and they're happening. So there has to be, clearly we have to create a different model. We don't have to create, we have to find a different model of reality that incorporates all these things that are real. But they are. I don't think that physics is going to come up with here's the reason why these things aren't real. I think it's going to be like, here's the larger model that incorporates all of these things that are truly real. And if we look through history and across cultures all over the world, people staying connected with their departed loved ones is commonplace. So we're the weird ones. Modern society is the weird, like if other cultures and other times looked at us, they'd be like, you idiots. Of course we stay connected to our loved ones. Of course love is the cornerstone of the afterlife. Of course we're still able to communicate with our animals that have died. We're the weird ones. We're the ones not making any sense. This is just how it works. Consciousness survives, and we stay connected, and we can still communicate with our loved ones who have passed.
And so you think survival versus super psi, survival is the most likely explanation.
Hi, I'm interrupting a second so I can explain what is super psi. I have addressed it a lot in other episodes, but in case this happens to be your first episode, first of all, welcome. And second of all, I'll just quickly explain that super psi is this concept that mediums, psychics, remote viewers, everyone is able to get all their information from a type of cloud, a bank of endless information. And that instead of communicating with deceased consciousness that survived in some way, mediums are getting all this information, which is a form of record, an imprint, however people explain it, of everything that ever was, of people who lived here, of people's thoughts, of experiences, somehow gets imprinted. And mediums are downloading information from that, but we don't actually survive, or they're not actually communicating with anyone whose consciousness has survived. And now back to our episode.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, super psi is an outdated term. I did a presentation called Super Psi is Dead, and it about the terminology is just wrong. It's also called living agent psi, LAP, which they call it because the medium is living, but so's the sitter. And they don't, as usual, terms that scientists come up with, it's often the first term someone thought of, and it doesn't really define anything. In biology, which I know best, there's a chemical messenger called tumor necrosis factor. Like killing a tumor is like only one of the things that sucker does. And vascular endothelial growth factor only grows new vessels sometimes, but it also does other things. So the names of things do not mean we understand the thing. It's just whatever got named first. So I renamed them. And so, because what a medium is doing is psi, it's clearly a psychic function. So I renamed them. Well, there was the name in the literature already, survival psi. So that is the medium is communicating with the departed using psi. And so then I, with my colleague Adam Rock, we put forth the term somatic psi. And so that would be the explanation that the medium is reading like the body of information stored in the Akashic record, or connecting with the body of the living sitter. So somatic, soma means body. So survival psi, talking to dead people. Somatic psi, no dead people, only using psychic functioning. And so this finding that under blinded conditions, they experience more love, supported survival psi and refuted somatic psi.
And so you're sitting with someone like me 5 years ago who's just like, okay, I'm reading all this, but I can't believe it. How could consciousness survive? I've never heard any of this, and I'm in super grief and really hopeful. What's something you would say to someone in that state?
There's lots of things that we've been taught that are wrong. Like if you just look at healthcare, right? There's things that, it used to be, they're like, you need to have a pap smear once a year. And now they're like, every 3 to 5, maybe we'll catch it if it's in there. So there's things that like they were telling us this is for your survival. And now we're like, it's not so bad. So there's lots of things. Remember when eggs were bad, but then eggs were good, but then eggs were bad again? Like, no, you can't trust the system. I would say turn internally. Does that feel good? Does it feel good to believe that we just die and that's the end of it? Or do you feel like there's something different and there's something more? Like, really get in tune with yourself and like, what does it feel like? Because there's lots of bullshit getting thrown around and no one, not even I, have all the answers, not even me. But you have to use your own test for it within yourself. Does that feel right? I don't, like, our bodies are really knowledgeable and they have lots of wisdom. Like, our sense of taste keeps us from eating poison. Our sense of smell keeps us from eating rotten food or getting too close to infection or, bodies that are decaying. So your body has a lot of its own internal wisdom, and sit with that. Be quiet for a moment. In my book, I talk about meditation. The data are that the best way to be more psychic is learn meditation. And it's not clearing your mind. The mind doesn't like to be clear necessarily. It has jobs to do, but it likes to focus. It likes to be good at what it's trying to do. So if you focus on just counting your breaths or, focus on what do I see right now? What do I feel? What do I smell? Like, mindfully being aware of your surroundings. Get in those kind of states. And again, your body has the tools. It ain't going to eat poison. It ain't going to spend time with a corpse. It knows those things are bad. So does this idea of scientific materialism, does that make you, what does your body have to say about that? Do you think that when we die, when the brain dies, that's the end of it? Or do you feel like there's more than that? Over 90% of people in surveys believe in an afterlife. So it's not weird to believe it. Even people who don't believe in an afterlife will still report having experiences of after-death communication. They'll say, I don't believe in an afterlife, but I did connect with my departed mother or whatever. It's about the semantics. It's about the language. And so get language, get the frontal cortex out of the system and like feel it in your body. What is the wisdom of your body telling you?
I'll just add that a lot of people I have heard since I've started opening up that this is what I'm doing, and now it's pretty public. So many people have said to me, I don't really believe this, but, and then they have an absolutely inexplicable story.
Exactly. It doesn't, guess what? Your departed loved ones don't care what you believe. If they want to be connected to you, they're going to be connected to you. It doesn't matter what you say you believe. So if people are interested in the free educational materials that the Windbridge Research Center charity has, that you can find those on windbridge.org. Again, if you go to the education tab, there's all kinds of things. There's videos from my scientific conferences. We did an afterlife symposium a couple years ago. All 11 of those videos are available there on the education page. There's fact sheets. As a charity, that's our mission, is to provide free information to people on these topics, because what they're getting, like, we receive no training about any of this. And so we wanted to make it the lowest bar of entry we could. So it's all free at windbridge.org. And if you want to follow me and my adventures, my website is juliebphd.com. I'll post there about any new books or events or anything like that. You can join my email list. I think that's all I want to say. I'm really, really proud of this book, Love in the Afterlife. And I really think it can help a lot of people. And it offers some good tips about how to move through the world with this knowledge that none of us have received in our adulthood training in what to do. You can have afterlife beliefs and experiences, and that's normal. And no one's telling anybody that. I have a friend who's a high school teacher, and he lost a colleague, and a male colleague and one of his female colleagues. They're all three friends, right? They all work together. They're all three friends. And the one guy dies. And the female teacher, she started having after-death communication experiences of the deceased teacher. And they made her take a leave of absence and see a counselor. So he was saying, the third one goes, one, I believe you, and two, you should look into the work of Julie Beischel and, read this book, Love in the Afterlife. Because so these people are being punished, literally punished for these beliefs. I worked with a LCSW licensed clinical social worker named Beth Christofferson, and we wrote a paper because therapists in their training, they learn that the idea of religion and spirituality are important to health, but they receive no training about afterlife beliefs and experiences. And so she created a tool that will allow clinicians some training in that area because there's nowhere that they're getting that training. So at the center, we try and serve multiple populations, scientists with our published peer-reviewed journal articles. We actually publish our own journal, to our own peer-reviewed journal called Threshold. And you can read all those papers there as well. But we want to serve clinicians who treat the grieving. We want to serve mediums because, they got it tough. And we want to just serve the general public. Usually that's people who are grieving or just people interested in consciousness. So with these free educational materials, the Windbridge Research Center really wants to do it. It's a charity.
And thank you so much. I will just say to everyone, go read Dr. Beischel's books, go to her website and read the studies. They're written in different forms. They're free. Most of them are free. I don't want to speak for all of them, but
yes, just to be clear, some of the papers that are published in journals, we don't have the rights to, but then we write a fact sheet summarizing it, and then that's free.
There is just, such a vast body of just stuff that is so profound and just life-changing. So I recommend all of it. And honestly, Dr. Beischel, you and the work at Windbridge is what got me through my first few months of grief. I cannot imagine getting through those months without all of your research. So I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm so glad that we were able to be there for you and that it was a resource that you could get a hold of. I'm really thankful for that. Thank you for your thanks.
To get more information on what the fuck just happened, go to WTFJustHappened.net. There you can order my book, What the Fuck Just Happened? A Sciencey Skeptic Explores Grief, Healing, and Evidence of an Afterlife. And you can learn all about how I came to conclude that there most likely is an afterlife. You can also learn about the early stages of my grief and the amazing, fascinating people I met along the way. You can also read about how much I harassed them trying to get evidence, see if they were cheating, and see if they were sane. There, you can subscribe to our newsletter. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. It makes such a difference, especially for a new podcast like this one. And if any of you have had a crazy what the fuck yourself, have any questions, feedback, or just want to say hi, reach out on either Instagram at WTF_just_happened_ or email me at hello@WTFJustHappened.net. And remember, you don't have to draw any final conclusions as you wonder what the fuck just happened.